right, we turn now to a topic a little lighter. Orange County Register political reporter joins us now, Peggy Lowe, with all the very latest in politics.
Hey,
Hi,
Ann.
Peggy. We're glad to have you on. Let's talk a little bit about the grand jury. They have rebuked the sheriff's department over the jail killings. First, give us a little background. How long did the grand jury spend on this particular case?
You're talking about the murder of inmate John Chamberlain. This was in October of 2006, and he was murdered allegedly after one of the deputies falsely told some of the other inmates that this guy was a child molester, so the inmates beat him up because of that and killed him. Actually, that wasn't the case. He'd been arrested on a misdemeanor charge of child pornography. So the grand jury took 9 months and investigated. And last Friday, DA Tony Rackauckas announced that 9 inmates will be charged in this. He also said at the time, and this is the very interesting part, that none of the people in the sheriff's department will be charged with any sort of criminal behavior because there have been lots of rumors that there were problems. What's interesting then now is what you're referring to today, Ann, which is the grand jury issued a letter to interim Sheriff Jack Anderson and to the Supes and said, you guys violated, meaning the Sheriff's Department, a 20-year protocol that called for the DA's investigators to go in and look at that crime scene, and you didn't allow him in, and you should never do that again.
So the Sheriff's Department essentially handled the entire case on its own.
That's exactly right.
Okay, and that's, as you said, that violates a 20-year law, a gentleman's agreement? What is it?
It's basically a protocol that they agreed to some 20 years ago, and it's how they've always done it. I think the grand jury in the letter said something like 206 inmate deaths have always been done that way, except for this one. They violated it on this one. So, as Tony Rackauckas pointed out last Friday, there may still be some disciplinary measures that will happen within the Sheriff's Department, like, say, a firing. But, of course, now we know that already the Assistant Sheriff, Joe Anglei, who was involved in that investigation, has been fired. And we know that Steve Bishop, another Assistant Sheriff, very quickly resigned late on a Friday night. We talked about that last week. I
was just going to mention, as of last week, it was still sort of no detail offered about either one of those firing/letting goes. Anything else come up this week regarding that?
Well, that's what's interesting, too. There are, the grand jury issued 8,000 pages of investigation on this. We have not seen that. Jack Anderson's been briefed about that by the DA and by the grand jury, but he hasn't seen all of it either. Tony Rackauckas said last week he will issue that in 7 weeks. And the grand jury, in this very strongly worded letter that they issued today, said, we want the public to see that, and we want the Sheriff's Department held accountable for this. So we're really hoping, as reporters certainly, that the public gets to see this, and the grand jury wants that to happen.
Is there such a thing? I guess the question is there double jeopardy in a grand jury investigation? I mean, can they go back and reopen this case and look at it again once the decisions have been rendered, or is that...
I'm not certain that there's any sort of double jeopardy. That typically applies to things like murder. However, there are things like runaway grand juries where they will go away from what the DA is leaning them towards as far as criminal charges. Now, this letter isn't a runaway grand jury, but it is certainly not a common occurrence that a grand jury issues these letters and say how they feel about this and even rebuke the Sheriff's Department for the behavior.
Well, what about some of the changes that the interim sheriff is doing? I mean, he seems to be very proactive, other than the fact that a couple of staff people are already gone. But he's taking some other measures, is he not? He
is, and people keep saying that acting Sheriff Jack Anderson is doing a lot of acting. And he is. He's made a lot of changes. He's instituted changes about where sexual offenders are housed, for instance, at Theo Lacey. He asked the Supes to, and the Supes agreed to this on Tuesday, to hire an independent watchdog, a guy named Michael Giannacco out of Los Angeles. He heads up the Office of Independent Review there. So, yeah, Anderson has instituted, several changes, including a shakeup of his own command staff.
And Giannacco, he has a reputation for being tough.
Very respected guy, a civil rights attorney, former prosecutor, has done a lot of internal investigations in Los Angeles and served on a lot of federal commissions about that. And now he'll come in and he'll look at jail policy and procedures here in Orange County and issue a report to the board in the wake of this Chamberlain murder.
All right, let's talk about Theo Lacey. The supervisors okayed the ability to seek funds for an expansion.
This is kind of a complicated story, so I hope that I tell it right. The state is saying to all the counties, we have several $100 million that we're going to give you to expand your jails, because there's jail overcrowding across
everywhere,
California. So, but you have to compete. So in order to compete, we have to come up with this grant, the County of Orange. So Jack Anderson was telling yesterday the Soups about his grant application. As part of that application, he wants to get $100 million for an expansion of music. But he would also have to create basically what they call a re-entry facility, so a place to parole guys, and he wants to put it at Theo Lacey. Well, this has angered the Orange City Council, who says, hey, we have a very strict contract with the county that says you can't expand by one bed without going through us, and you didn't go through us, so you guys are going to have to fix that. So we'll see what happens on that.
Okay, Peggy, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
See you next time.
Peggy.